Cal stirred awake, his head pounding as his surroundings swirled into focus. The last thing he remembered was the deafening roar of his ship disintegrating, followed by a flash of fire and the void of unconsciousness. Now, his body ached with the sharp sting of the crash, scrapes and bruises covering his limbs. Nothing about this place felt familiar. The air was thick and warm, the light filtering through the trees in a way that felt wrong. As his mind slowly cleared, he sat up, his thoughts racing to catch up. This wasn't Earth, and whatever had pulled him from the wreckage hadn't left any clues. He scanned his surroundings, taking in the strange alien forest before him, its trees with jagged metallic branches and vast, blue leaves heavy with dew. The shadows flickered unnervingly, a reminder that he wasn't alone. He instinctively tried to call out, but before he could even test his voice, a hum in the air made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Someone was watching him. He turned and froze. A figure stood just a few feet away, unlike any being he had ever seen in his years of exploration. She was tall, her skin a shimmering violet hue, almost glowing under the sunlight. Her eyes were stark white, unblinking and sharp, staring at him with an intensity that made him feel small. A delicate metal crown rested on her forehead, curving around her like a weapon, and a flowing cape trailed behind her like liquid shadow. Her mere presence demanded respect, radiating authority in every movement. But it wasn't just the commanding air about her that unsettled him. It was the quiet power that seemed to hum from her very being. "I saved you," she said, her voice a low, menacing purr. "But you live on my terms." A chill ran through Cal. His instincts screamed caution. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice betraying his uncertainty. Her eyes narrowed, as if his question were more of an inconvenience than anything. "I am Kiss, Queen of Alara," she replied, each word deliberate and cold. "You, human, are trespassing on my world." He froze, unsure of how to process this. He'd narrowly escaped death, only to find himself in the presence of a powerful alien queen. "Why save me, then?" he asked, his voice smaller than he wanted it to be. She tilted her head slightly, a hint of amusement crossing her face. "Because you will hunt alongside me. Your life is of use to me." For now, her bluntness hit him hard. He had barely survived, and now he was being dragged into some alien queen's hunt. But the unyielding authority in her gaze told him that resisting was not an option. He swallowed hard, steadying himself. "Fine, I'll help, but I'm no warrior." Her smile deepened, cold and knowing. "Then you will learn quickly." Without another word, she turned and glided through the undergrowth with an effortless grace, leaving him scrambling to keep up. Her cape barely touched the leaves as she moved soundlessly through the forest. Cal followed, stumbling over roots and ducking under branches, his mind overwhelmed with questions. Where was she leading him? What did she want from him? In the tense silence, her presence loomed over him, a constant reminder of the danger he was in. Every so often, Cal noticed Kiss casting a brief glance over her shoulder, her gaze sharp and calculating. Whether out of curiosity or silent judgment, he couldn't tell. It made him feel exposed, as though she could see right through him. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small clearing. The ground was mostly bare, save for a circle of stone that served as a makeshift arena. Kiss came to a stop at the edge, her eyes sweeping over the space before meeting his. "We hunt those who defy me," she said, her voice laced with barely contained rage. "They are of my kind, but they spread lies and threaten my reign. They must be removed." Cal swallowed hard as the weight of her words sank in. "And you need me for this?" Kiss gave him a glance that mixed disdain and faint amusement. "Your survival will prove your worth. Keep up, and you might have a place in this hunt." He wanted to protest, to tell her he wasn't a fighter, that he didn't belong in her war, but the intensity in her eyes stopped him cold. There was no room for argument here. This was not a choice, but a demand. "What exactly do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Kiss stepped toward him, her eyes gleaming with something dark, almost predatory. "You'll follow my lead, learn my ways, and when the time comes, you'll strike as I do." Cal hadn't slept a minute. The alien forest seemed to close in around him, its eerie sounds a constant reminder of how far he was from home. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined something watching him from the shadows, waiting for the moment he let his guard down. Even when the forest was silent, Kiss's words echoed in his mind, and her piercing gaze haunted him. Tomorrow the hunt would begin. At the first light of dawn, a pale blue glow casting long shadows across the clearing, he heard a rustle. Reflexively, he sprang to his feet, instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. But it wasn't a creature. It was Kiss, moving silently, appearing out of nowhere like a shadow. "Up already?" she asked, her tone cool with a hint of mockery. "Perhaps there is some warrior in you after all." Cal gritted his teeth, Forcing down the frustration her words stirred. "I'm ready, or as ready as I'll ever be." Kiss gave a brief nod, though her face betrayed no hint of approval. She tossed him a long, slender blade, its hilt marked with symbols he couldn't recognize. "You'll need this," she said, her voice steady and practical. "It's a blade of Aurora, forged in the flames of our people. Treat it with respect, or it will turn on you." Cal took the blade, feeling its light weight and the sharpness of the edge. Despite its lightness, it radiated danger. He nodded quickly, a strange sense of pride stirring inside him at being given such an important weapon, one that held meaning in her world. They moved through the forest with a swift pace, Kiss gliding effortlessly between the trees while Cal struggled to keep up. She was a blur of fluid movement, her steps light and graceful, as though the forest was her home. He, on the other hand, stumbled, tripping over roots and fighting to navigate the thick underbrush. She never once looked back, but he could sense her awareness of his every misstep, her posture shifting just enough to ensure she was ready to catch him should he fall. After a while, he found his voice and spoke, trying to push past the tension in the air. "Who are we hunting, exactly?" Kiss slowed her pace slightly, casting a quick glance over her shoulder. "Rebels, outcasts who think they can undermine my reign. They hide in the shadows, spreading lies to erode my authority." He nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "And why do you need me? Surely you could handle them alone." A brief flicker of amusement passed across her face, barely noticeable. "Perhaps, but the hunt is more than just a task. It's about loyalty, about spirit. I want to see what drives you, human. I want to know if there's real strength beneath that defiance in your eyes." They continued in silence, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. As they walked, Cal's mind raced with questions, but his instincts told him to wait. After a while, Kiss came to a sudden halt, her eyes fixed on something ahead. She raised a hand, signaling for him to stop. Without thinking, he obeyed, his grip tightening around the blade she had given him. "There," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, pointing toward a figure in the distance. The figure was tall, cloaked in dark armor, blending seamlessly with the shadows. Cal barely made out any features, but he could feel the tension in the air, an undeniable hostility that radiated from the man as he moved forward. "One of my kind," Kiss said softly, "but he defies my authority. Today he will face the consequences." Without another word, she moved forward, her body slipping into the shadows with the ease of a predator. Cal hesitated, unsure of whether to follow, but the intensity of her presence stirred something within him. He crept after her, trying his best to move as silently as she did. As they neared the target, Kiss paused, her fingers brushing against her weapon. She glanced back at him, her eyes flashing with a silent warning. "When I strike, you strike. Understood?" Cal nodded, a surge of adrenaline flooding through him as he tightened his grip on the blade. This was no longer just a hunt. It was his initiation, his first step into her world, and he felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. In a blur of motion, Kiss lunged, her blade flashing through the air. The rebel, caught off guard, spun toward her, eyes wide with surprise as he tried to defend himself. But Kiss was too quick. Her blade cut through his defenses with lethal precision. Before he could react, Cal followed her lead, stabbing the man with his own weapon. The rebel crumpled to the ground, his life fading from his eyes as he looked up at Kiss. She stood over him, her face cold and unreadable, the blood still dripping from her blade. "You made your choice," she said, her voice devoid of any empathy. Cal stood there, breathless, watching as she turned and walked away, leaving the rebel's lifeless body behind. She didn't pause to reflect, her steps never faltering as they walked away from the body. For Kiss, this was merely part of the hunt, something done without a second thought. Cal felt a cold realization settle over him, watching the alien queen who killed with such ease, every motion deliberate, every action final. She was no ordinary leader. She was something far more dangerous, a force of nature with no hesitation. As they moved further into the forest, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. Finally, he couldn't hold back. "How many are there? How many more of your people?" Kiss glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Enough. They will come. They always do." Her words chilled him, but he kept his composure. This was more than just a hunt for her. It was a test, a trial to see how far he would go, how deeply he would embrace the darkness of her world. And despite the fear, despite the gnawing uncertainty, he knew he couldn't turn back. Not now. They pressed on through the dense woods, the lingering scent of blood in the air. The shadows thickened as they hunted the rest of her enemies. With every step, Cal felt the weight of his decision settle deeper into his bones. He wasn't just a man stranded on an alien world anymore. He was a hunter, bound to a queen who trusted no one but herself. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with danger, but he followed her without hesitation, drawn into the heart part of her world. Into the realm of shadows she ruled alone. As they walked, an icy shiver ran down his spine. Kiss wasn't just asking for his loyalty, she was demanding his submission to her cause. She wanted him to become a part of her world, to embrace its darkness. With a final, unreadable glance, Kiss turned back to the clearing. "Rest, human," she commanded. "Tomorrow, the hunt begins." And then, without another word, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving him alone in the alien landscape, her chilling words hanging in the air. Cal lowered himself onto a stone, the harsh reality of his situation sinking in. He was at the mercy of this alien queen, tied to a mission that still felt beyond his understanding. But as he stared into the dark forest around him, a spark of resolve flickered within him. He didn't know what Kiss truly wanted from him, but he had survived the hunt so far. And in a world like this, survival was the only thing that mattered. The day had been a blur of violent encounters. As night settled, Cal could hardly believe he was still alive. Kiss had led him through ambushes and dark thickets, each step more perilous than the last. Her movements were swift and lethal, and for the first time in his life, Cal felt his own strength grow in response. With each kill, he matched her speed, her ferocity, pushing himself beyond what he had ever thought possible. Now, in the quiet of the clearing, with the last of her enemies lying dead at their feet, Kiss knelt beside the fallen rebel. Her gaze was as hard as ever, yet there was something there, something softer that she tried to mask. As she cleaned her blade, the silence between them grew heavy, filled with the words neither of them wanted to say. Cal observed her, his weariness replaced by a surprising sense of pride. It was done. The hunt had ended. "It's finished then?" he asked softly. Kiss nodded, her eyes momentarily distant as she took in the surrounding forest. "Yes," she answered, her voice low. "Those who betrayed me have met their end." She sheathed her blade and turned her gaze to Cal. For the first time, he saw something in her eyes that was more than command or calculation. It was respect, quiet but unmistakable. "You fought well, human," she said, her tone warmer than he'd anticipated. "Better than I'd hoped." A tired smile flickered across Cal's face, and he shrugged, brushing off her praise. "I just did what you did," he said, his voice trailing off. "Without you, I probably wouldn't be here." She nodded, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "Perhaps, but you stood firm. That's not something to take lightly." They stood in silence, the weight of everything they'd been through settling over them. For Cal, exhaustion mingled with an unexpected sense of accomplishment, a quiet pride in having made it through not just by Kiss's mercy, but through his own strength. He had fought alongside her, survived, and earned a place beside her. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice low. Kiss turned to him, her silver eyes glowing softly in the light of the alien moon. "Now you are free. Your debt is paid." The words hung in the air, both liberating and bittersweet. He had longed for freedom, to escape and return to what was familiar. Yet, standing there beside her, he felt a strange reluctance, a pull to stay. Taking a deep breath, he chose his words carefully. "Kiss, I don't want to leave." She regarded him steadily, her expression unreadable. "And why not?" "Because," he hesitated, struggling to articulate the shift he had felt. "Because here I found something. Purpose, perhaps. A reason to keep fighting. And I know it's because of you." For a brief moment, her hard exterior softened, revealing a trace of vulnerability. She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "Then stay," she said quietly, almost as a whisper. "Alera's queen does not need allies, but I would welcome one." Her words were heavy with meaning, an invitation not just to follow, but to stand beside her as an equal. Cal's heart raced, and without hesitation, he nodded. "I'll stay." Under the pale stars, they stood in silence, a bond forged in shared struggle and trust. Then, for the first time, Kiss smiled, a small, genuine smile that softened her features, making her seem almost human. "Then let us return," she said with quiet satisfaction. "Alera awaits." Together, they left the clearing, walking side by side into the depths of the darkened forest, their paths now intertwined. As they walked back toward her kingdom, Cal realized he had discovered something he hadn't even known he was searching for. A place where he truly belonged, and a queen who now walked beside him as a partner, a friend, and perhaps, in time, something even deeper. The moon hung low above Alera's palace, bathing the rugged stone and towering spires in a soft, silvery glow. Cal stood on the palace balcony, eyes fixed on the vast landscape below. In the distance, the shadowed forest loomed, the place where he and Kiss had tracked her enemies only days before. It already felt like a lifetime ago. Since their return, Cal had been given a place in the palace modest, but his own. A small suite of rooms with a view over the southern plains. Life in the palace bustled around him, and though many still saw him as an outsider, he began to feel a sense of belonging he hadn't thought possible on this alien world. The people were growing used to his presence, and a few even nodded in his direction as he walked through the halls. A small gesture, but one that filled him with a quiet sense of acceptance. Kiss, however, had been different. Though still reserved, there was something in her behavior that had changed. Her glances lingered just a little longer, and her words carried a softness when they were alone together. She no longer treated him as a stranger, but as someone who had earned his place beside her, someone worthy of her trust. The sound of footsteps drew his attention, and he turned to see Kiss approaching. She was dressed in her ceremonial armor, her violet skin gleaming in the moonlight. She looked every bit the powerful queen of Alara, commanding and regal. Yet there was a softness in her expression as she approached him. "Enjoying the view?" she asked, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. Cal smiled back, nodding. "It's beautiful here, but it's strange. When I first arrived, all I wanted was to leave. Now," he trailed off at a loss for words. Kiss studied him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "And now you've found something worth staying for." There was a silent understanding between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of everything they had been through together, the bond forged in struggle and loyalty. She stepped closer, standing beside him as their gazes turned to the horizon, where the moonlight bathed the land in quiet serenity. "The people see you now, Cal," she said quietly. "They respect you as one of us." His chest warmed at her words, a satisfaction he hadn't expected. "I owe it to you," he replied, his voice sincere. "Without you, I don't think I would have lasted through my first night here." She let out a soft laugh, rare and fleeting. "Perhaps, but you've proven your own strength. That's why I brought you here. Not just to test your loyalty, but your spirit." They stood in silence, gazing at the stars above. In the stillness, Cal sensed a moment of rare vulnerability from her, a side she only revealed in these quiet, shared moments. "I've fought alone for so long," she said, her voice soft and barely audible. "Trust has always been difficult for me, but you've shown me that trust isn't always a weakness." He met her eyes, a wave of emotion rising within him. "Kiss, you don't have to face this alone." "Not anymore." She reached out, placing her hand gently on his arm, a touch that spoke volumes more than words could express. "No," she whispered, "I do not." For a long moment, they remained there, standing together, the queen and her companion, bound by something deeper than duty or loyalty. As the night wore on, they made their way back to the palace, walking side by side, their steps in sync. Alara's shadows still held many dangers, and Kiss's position as queen would always be fraught with uncertainty. But in that moment, as long as they stood together, Cal felt certain they could face whatever came their way. Under the watchful stars, they embarked on a new journey, not just as allies or strangers, but as something deeper, something worth fighting for.